Now, there are a variety of very colorful examples of environmental injustice in the early parts of the selection from this book we're reading. And I won't go through all of them, but I've listed a number of them here on the site, here on the slides. I'll just talk through the first one because it's emblematic of environmental justice problems and environmental justice movements. And it's also arguably the place where the environmental justice movement as a whole got started. So there was a community, predominantly African American, basically housing development or group of houses in Texas at Carver Terrace, called Carver Terrace. And Patsy Oliver, who was an African American resident at this housing development, noticed that there was some kind of gunk, some kind of like goop oozing up through cracks in the sidewalks and things like that. And around this time, a number of people in the community started to get sick, to exhibit different kinds of health problems. And this was around the time that some similar environmental problems were being noticed in New York, in some areas of New York City. And those problems were addressed in New York, were addressed with great haste and a lot of publicity about there being this kind of legacy of pollution from a company that had deposited waste previously, and it was causing health problems in the community. Well, Patsy Oliver made the connection between this gunk and the health problems in her community, and she brought this to the attention of the media and of whatever kinds of authorities that she could get the attention of. But she found that it was very hard to actually get anything done about it. And the thought was that it's probably hard to get something done about it because this isn't some neighborhood in New York that maybe has a lot of pull with politicians and so on. This is an African American community in Texas. And our problems aren't being listened to or addressed or taken seriously. And so she had to do a lot of advocacy to get the interests of the community in having this gunk cleaned up or being compensated for the damages, etc. She had to do a lot of movement building and advocacy and the whole range of things, protests and petitions and talks with the media and so on, in order to get anything done. And eventually she did succeed in getting those houses basically bought up. The residents were compensated, and the houses were bought at presumably a fair or good compensatory price to compensate them for the damages. And I don't know, maybe there were other kinds of compensation for damage as well, but that result of the buying of the houses is what Shrader-Frachette mentions. So this, in a way, is a kind of emblematic. This is an example emblematic of environmental justice, Shrader-Frachette says, because the activist here, Patsy Oliver, is not a professional activist. She's not a professional environmental philosopher or environmentalist. She's not really someone like Dave Foreman in a lot of ways, who's been in environmental movements for a long time. She's someone who's just trying to protect her community. She's just trying to protect herself and her community and keep people from getting sick and get them compensated if they've been harmed. And this is very common in environmental justice movements. And she's coming from the position of a traditionally marginalized group, African Americans, poor African Americans. And so a lot of these other cases have similar features, that there's a sense that some community is being disproportionately affected by some environmental harm, and that there are obstacles to getting fair treatment about that disproportionate harm. So again, I won't go through all of these examples, but you can easily read about them. Shrader-Frachette describes each of them in about a paragraph in the beginning part of her text. Now, there can be a variety of causes for these problems, but some of which are intentional, some of which are not intentional. So sometimes environmental injustice comes about not not clearly as a result of any individual actor's choices or describable set of actors' choices, but through various kinds of structural factors. However, there is also evidence that some people at the top who are making decisions have made decisions in a way that are, overtly unjust or overtly discriminatory, and show a kind of lack of concern for justice considerations. So here's an example. This is a memo that was leaked from a major economist in the World Bank. And I'll just read the passage here from Shrader-Frachette. A chief economist from the World Bank recently created a massive controversy when he wrote an internal memo explaining the economic rationale for such waste transfers, namely transfers of waste from developed countries to less developed countries. There was an example she gave of basically a chemical company in Philadelphia arranging with some political leaders in Africa to deposit waste in their country. And the problem with that decision, it turned out, is that the people of that country had not been consulted. So the leaders of the country agreed, oh yeah, we'll allow you to deposit the waste in return for some kind of monetary compensation. But basically the people in that country had been sold out by their leaders, and the people who were shipping the waste out, it was actually from Philly. The people who were shipping the waste out from the company in Philly, they didn't really check as to whether or not the decision-making process that led to their being able to deposit the waste was one that had involved the approval of the community. And so the result was a kind of environmental injustice. So, but this kind of dumping of toxics in less developed countries is a common practice. And this memo from the chief economist describes that practice and actually tried to defend it. So here's the rest of the quote from Shrader-Frachette. The memo was leaked to the press in 1991. It said, "Just between you and me, shouldn't the World Bank be encouraging more migration of the dirty industries to the less developed countries?" The memo further enraged ethicists and environmentalists by offering 3 reasons that developing nations were good places to dump toxics. 1, this is the really offensive part. I mean, the other parts, it's maybe offensive already, just the suggestion, but the reasons are particularly offensive, right? Their citizens already had a lower life expectancy, so dumping toxics on them doesn't make their lives that much worse. Such countries were relatively underpolluted. That is, there's less pollution there now, so we could add some pollution there. And impairing the health of the people with the lowest wages made the greatest economic sense. In other words, people there aren't contributing that much economically because their wages aren't high. So we're not hurting the world economy that much by dumping waste there. You can see, I think, all the problems here. The problems are that the lives of people in these countries, their health, are all treated as of less importance or value than that of humans elsewhere. That is, if, it's a pretty, if anything is unjust, that's unjust. That's not treating the people there as having an equal right to, or an equal claim to live an undisturbed life, or live a life that is not subject to particular harms or risks that others aren't subjected to.